De mare.
Welcome. Hello. So we are live for Africa Week 2020. This is a conversation on colorism. My name is Avita Sawyer, and I am going to cede the floor to my fellow participants on the panel so that they can introduce themselves and we can get into this very important discussion of colorism, our personal experiences with it, how we see it affect the African diaspora, and what things that we can do to combat that, both in the collective society and also within ourselves. So I will start with Kiana, if you can introduce yourself, and then Catherine after Kiana, and then we'll have Amanda, and then we'll dive right into it.
Hello, everyone. Hey, I'm Kiana Ollison. I'm a Portland native. So I consider myself, I guess, African American, American, Black, Pan-African. I consider all of those buckets. I'm interested in social justice and business. I went to PSU for business. And I got a degree in leadership and management. I worked at a lot of nonprofits in my past, and I work part-time at a nonprofit that supports minority business owners, marginalized business owners, women-owned businesses, and I'm currently building a business. It's called Office Retreat. So I've been fundraising to build a collaborative office and event space for BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, POC, my entrepreneurs and creatives. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. And I'm glad to be here with you all and to talk about colorism. It's something I'm very passionate about.
Okay, so hi, I'm Catherine Watkins. Okay, I'm hearing a lot of feedback. Are you guys hearing feedback? Oh, that's not good. Okay, let me try to figure out what's going on.
Not now. The feedback is gone.
Okay, Catherine, it's better.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Catherine Watkins, I'm an organ transplant. I was born in California and lived in South Dakota, Arizona, Idaho, and then kind of got conned up here, and I'm a little bitter, but I've been here for about 19 years now, so and I own here, so I guess this is just me now. And I have an 18-year-old son. I teach humanities at Cedar Park Middle School here in Beaverton School District, and I've been an English teacher for 22 years, and I identify as Black, White, and Indian. Of course, I'm saying Indigenous more often now, but let's see. And I'm definitely into social justice. I write. I have articles and freelancers. So whenever someone wants me to write something for them about whatever the issue is, then I do that. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about this because, especially being a light mixed person, colorism has always been in my memory from like the very first childhood memories. So it's something that I've always had in my life, and I'd love to be able to help people deal with it.
I guess it's my turn. I'm Amanda Harrison, and I am a native Oregonian, native Portlander as well. Catherine, your story, that made me laugh really hard. And Kiana, it's so great that you are also a native Portlander, you mentioned. Um, I have been in Portland my whole life. I can remember the time when I learned I was Black, and I've also I have stories and memories of remembering when I discovered I wasn't Black enough, but also not white. And so that whole idea of colorism has just been something that I experienced, and I didn't have a name for it because it wasn't really spoken about for a long time until college, which is pretty sad because although this experience is not new, it's not brought out into the open in the same way. We learn about racism, but we don't talk about colorism and the difference there. Um, and I've also tried to share information like this in terms of the impact and what we can do with the people that I work with. I work at our Portland Community College, and I spend a lot of time and energy working with folks on social justice type issues, talking about how people's different experiences and sense of belonging are affected by the way that we view ourselves, and when we can name for ourselves what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, and then looking at those thoughts and making changes in the way that we behave, that will affect others in different ways. So it's really important to me in terms of a sense of belonging, and that whole idea of exclusion is really painful and hurtful. And so colorism is one of those spaces where that exists. And I think it deserves a platform.
And I want to work with PCC sometimes. So you and I have to become best friends.
I'm good with that. That's great.
Excellent. Thank you, ladies. And first of all, I didn't ask everybody's pronouns, so my pronouns are she, her. And what is everyone's
Vita, we can't hear you very well over here.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is that better?
We can hear you, but you were a little louder before. Maybe the way that I'm not sure where your mic is, but the way it was angled before was a bit louder.
Is this better?
I can barely hear her.
Hello?
We can hear you. You're just tiny. So maybe like project your voice or adjust where the mic is.
Oh, shoot.
You know what? Try signing out and sign back in. Because that's not a normal sound. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Africa Week 2020.
You did mention that we forgot our pronouns. I don't remember if I mentioned mine, but I use she and her pronouns. Would anyone else like to share theirs?
I do she, her, we, and us.
She, her, hers.
Queen is just fine for me.
I love that one too, but getting other people to use it is a little trickier.
Okay, here comes Vita. Let's see. Hello, Vita.
Hello.
Okay, welcome back. We can see you, but we can't hear you.
I wonder if she has headphones.
Oh, there you go. You were muted. You still, okay, cool. I love that. One moment.
She's trying something. I'll let you all continue the conversation. I'm sure. Okay. Let her know if you can hear her, okay?
Okay, we'll do. Thanks. We can't hear you yet, Avita.
You still can't hear me?
Oh, now we can. Welcome back.
Yay! All right,
that's great. Now
we got it worked out. I'm sitting in my. Told you I'm sitting in my mom's car because we're visiting this family, and it connected to the Bluetooth, and I think that's where the problem lied. So, anyways, we're gonna move on. So Alexandra actually approached me about doing this panel because I sat in on some like racial awareness training that she was doing it for a group that I was in. And I mentioned to her that I was going to be doing a workshop on colorism actually in polyamory. So I am a non-monogamy coach, educator, speaker, and I am doing a conference for that in November. And I got asked to do a presentation on colorism and polyamory. And so I was like, oh, okay, sure. You know, that's a good topic to talk about, especially for Black polyamorous people, because colorism often influences like who we deem attractive, who we want to date, what behaviors we attach to certain people based on their skin color, all of these different things. And so I began to ask in my communities of people, just like, what would you want to see in a workshop on colorism? What would you like to talk about? And the responses that I got were so emotionally charged that I was like, whoa, like this is a much larger topic than I had expected it to be. And growing up myself personally as a darker skinned individual, like I experienced colorism. So like now it's gotten, I would say, a little bit trendier, sort of, to be darker skinned, or it's not as difficult, or you don't receive as much ire for that. But when I was a kid and when I was growing up, it was the lighter skinned girls that were more attractive. Those were the ones that, you know, got people that wanted to date them. And I didn't even know a whole lot about the systemic effects of colorism. So like prison sentences, you know, job opportunities, even in classrooms, like what kids get seen as being more disruptive based on if they're darker or lighter. These were just all things that I didn't see as a child, because I was 16 and 17 and my world was, well, I like so-and-so, but so-and-so like such and such. And that was kind of how it showed up for me. And as a child, I got one of the people's first insults for me was to call me ugly, you know, because I was dark skinned. And, you know, so that was like their first like attack, you know, when someone wanted to like say something about me, was to call me ugly. And, you know, I heard the terms, you know, jigaboo and red bone and all these things that you kind of grow up with. And I had like a brief period of my life where, you know, I wanted to be more lighter skinned, but I'm very fortunate that my parents really raised us with this like belief that Black skin is beautiful. So like, it wasn't something that I like really like took into myself, you know, because I kind of had that foundation from my family of like loving your Black skin. But I definitely knew that like that was something that happened in my home, but like it wasn't necessarily what went on once I stepped into the outside world. And so I'd like to like open it up first for you all to just talk about your individual experiences with colorism in your life. And then we'll start having a conversation about, you know, how that speaks to our broader experience as Black, African American, and Latinx, you know, and everything in between people. So if anyone wants to go first.
Well, thanks, Vita. I don't know if I want to go first, but I did want to, sorry, I just got some coffee, which makes me so happy. Yay to the daughter, right? So I do want to open up a space for us to talk about what colorism is, because I don't know how many people have a strong sense of the subtle difference between colorism and racism as a whole. And so I just wanted to share my understanding of colorism, and then leave space to see what else we have, so that we all know we're talking about the same thing. So my understanding of colorism is it is internalized like white supremacy, internalized racism that happens within the group of people of color. So it's not necessarily from the outside, although we know that that exists. But the difference is this is people within our own group of people of color who are still having that assigning more value. I'm trying to think if that's the right word, privilege, to the folks with lighter colored skin than with folks with darker colored skin. And not just privilege, but as Evita kind of alluded to, the other things that go with it, like more of a sense of criminality if you have darker skin than if you have a lighter skin. Actually, I'm gonna do it this way because there's no up and down. It's more like, I'm gonna say more of a spectrum this way. So that's my understanding of it. It's those of us within our own group. And I'll share a little story, and then I'll pass it along so that anyone else can share their understanding also of colorism. So a story that I have is at one of the places that I work, I was experiencing, you know, just some rough times, some things with a colleague who I wanted to be connected with, and it was fine when we were working in different spaces. But when we started working in a closer space, I started noticing that this person became a little bit more and more gruff with me. And I wasn't understanding why. until I heard later that that person felt that because I was advancing in my positions, that it was probably because I wasn't actually Black and I didn't really have the Black experience because I have lighter skin. And I didn't realize that that was actually a thing. I didn't know that people within the same community would then separate themselves out and say, hey, you actually aren't quite one of us because you might have a different experience. So that was kind of a new thing to me, and that's when I kind of began exploring, like, is there, because in my brain I was very aware from as a child that I wasn't Black enough to be part of the Black culture, but I certainly was not white. And so there was somewhere in between where I kind of fit, but also realizing that even within the group of people of color, that there was an understanding that there were different experiences for those of us with darker skin than there were for people with lighter skin. But we didn't talk about it because we didn't have a name for it. We just kind of, there was an understanding inside my body, but not an intellectual understanding until I was an adult. What experiences have you all had?
Oh, can I add to what you're saying though?
Please, please.
Okay. So, because one of my other issues that I've kind of had all throughout my life when it comes to colorism is not only that isolation, the lighter you get, but also the shame that you are so light, and the loving of when summer comes, because then you're like, okay, there's going to be no questions. And then when January comes and you're just like, just stop talking about how pale I am. I know everything about my shades throughout the years, and so that colorism that affects your self-esteem also, because while some people might not have said it, about colorism, and you've spoken to your other mixed friends who are light, and so you hear about their insecurities, and you've experienced how dark people have said things, and you're just like, yeah, this is totally messed up, and I'm not trying to be superior, I'm not trying to have privilege, like, let me be your mouthpiece, like, we're in this together, so let's all, and so just that low confidence of being so pale is also one of the issues that I've kind of experienced with colorism too. And then also, like, when to shut up, because I am light, and so this is not my time, and there's darker experiences that need to be explained more, because I almost feel like some of my experiences are kind of common, whereas other people might not be.
Right. Like, can I call myself Black? This is something I've asked myself. People are like, how do you identify? And I'm like, well, I have brown skin. I have family of varying shades. I have family who are a lot darker than I am, and family who have white skin. And so I'm definitely not white, right? Like, this lighting, I have lots of lighting on me right now. I think according to the camera, it's much lighter than when I'm standing in a general room with folks. But even so, it doesn't actually matter. The point is, I do have this color skin, and in some spaces, this gives me a little bit of privilege, and in some spaces, not. And folks who are people of color who also have brown and Black experiences know that there's a difference in the experience that those of us with lighter skin have than those of us with darker skin. People who, your intelligence is even assessed based on your skin color unconsciously. I think there's a lot of focus now on, like, well, I don't think that way. And I believe that people don't think that way. I think people have internalized it and feel that way, and it takes a lot of work for us to bring that out and recognize it with our thoughts. And when we recognize it with our thoughts and we're like, oh, I was thinking that way, that's when we can be more powerful. I mean, that's what I found for myself. I think for myself, when I recognized my own thoughts and how I have to, like, think about, why do I think that person seems suspicious? And would I think my own sister was suspicious doing the same thing? Those kinds of thoughts that I have. And it was surprising me to be able to recognize that in myself. And I think nobody wants to be that person who thinks that way, but many of us feel that way. And speaking about it is the way that we can make change. And so I have to admit that I have feelings and gut reactions that are affecting things that have been so instilled so deep, that it took me a long time for that to come to my awareness, even to be able to say, like, yeah, I can now. I mean, was it Yana who mentioned that it was trendy to be Black now?
Yeah.
Are you the one that said that?
That was me, actually. Yeah.
So that
So
could be
yeah,
why
it
I'm
definitely
like,
was different. I don't know, Kiana, is that something that you experience? Like, I don't know how old you are. I'm 38, so like I grew up in the 90s on the East Coast, and so there was a lot of Black people around. So I grew up around a lot of Black people, but there was very much sort of a caste system in that, of like who was, and the closer proximity someone had to whiteness, the more, like you said, value was placed on that person, as opposed to someone that was darker, that had kinkier texture hair, that was much, much, much closer to quote unquote being Black, than someone who might have been like lighter skinned or mixed, or that, that kind of thing. Even to the point
Yes.
of like knowing, like I've had family members that, like, wanted to keep certain family members from, being in the sun too much because you don't want to get too Black, and that kind of thing. And so, Kiana, I wanted to know like what your experience was like that, because we're probably around the same age, so I'm curious to hear what your experience was.
Yeah, I definitely grew up in the 90s, and what I can say is there in the 90s there was more representation for brown-skinned women. Like there was at least a little bit. Like when I watched shows like Moesha, and in the early 2000s, watching Girlfriends and seeing Tony being, that was the first time I seen the dark skinned person be pronounced like, I'm the most beautiful, I'm the most fabulous, like I'm perfect. And it was just like, this is so opposite of what society is saying, and that this woman gets to be beautiful and experience, like, and people want her sexually, and she's successful, and she always got the guy. And watching shows like Moesha, where she gets to be fully, she gets to be brown, beautiful, successful, get the guy. And growing up, my sister is half Native American. But I look just like my mom, so I always thought I looked just like my grandmother. So I always thought that they were very beautiful, brown and dark skinned women, and they were very confident. But when I was growing up, I saw how society, and I felt like especially the boys reacted to my sister versus me. So it wasn't like anyone was telling me you're not attractive because you're dark, but it was just experiencing things and feeling like I can't talk about it, because if I talk about it, I'll be blamed. And so for it to be trendy, it is interesting to grow up feeling like society is telling you that having brown skin is unattractive, but now for it to be like, I had to find the beauty within myself. But now it is trendy. I hear people say all the time who have lighter skin, like, oh, I wish I was dark skinned. And I feel like it's very disingenuous, because it's like there's a real struggle. And then I also hear people say in 2020, yeah, that they don't want to sit in the sun. So it's like, if you don't want to sit in the sun, you don't want to be darker, because you understand what happens to dark people. So do you really want to be dark? And so I do appreciate people appreciating my skin now, I appreciate the chocolatiness of it all, and I refer to myself as chocolate too. So, yeah, but that's a little bit of my experience. So I just have a lot of different feelings about colorism, but I also do feel desired, or even exotic to some. And they're always talking about exotics. They never mean a dark skinned woman, but I do feel like people think that my skin is beautiful. So I just feel like I had to grow in that confidence in myself, and now I'm starting to see the world mirror that. And that's good, but it can be hard for young women. I think that there is a difference. Like, you can, growing up as a dark skinned woman and a lighter skinned woman, and I think that a lot of times the world is telling you that you're beautiful, and you're finding that in yourself, and you're getting that reassurance back. But I felt like I was growing up without the reassurance, and so I had to find it. Yeah. So that's a little bit about how I feel.
Yeah, it was actually interesting. You mentioned something that I actually noticed in the Black community specifically. So, if you're a darker skinned woman or a lighter skinned woman, if you're darker skinned, you get coded as more masculine than lighter skinned women. But on the flip side, for men that are lighter skinned are seen as more feminine and effeminate. So you see all those jokes about, like, like they say, like, Drake is like the ultimate light skinned dude because he's like effeminate and stuff like that. And so we attach femininity to being lighter skinned and masculinity to being darker skinned, and how that like shows up. And so I wanted to know if you had any of you had any experiences with that, or like any experience having like lighter skinned relatives that were men, and like how they were treated as opposed to maybe some of your darker skinned male relatives, because I definitely noticed that there is an association with lighter skin to femininity and darker skin to masculinity.
You know what, I haven't I've seen that not with my family, but with my friends. And what I learned recently is that there might be a historical context for that. I mentioned all these little historical things. My dad's a historian. So my whole life has been peppered with all these little like facts. And one of them is that one of the ways that colorism kind of played out was back as though it were a long time ago, but when slavery was stronger in the United States, and it wasn't a legalized slavery system like prison is, but it was on the fields, when they were choosing where different folks would be working, different slaves would be working, the people with the darker skin were often chosen to be outside and working in the fields. And it's not that it made them darker, but they were assigned those tasks. And if you had lighter skin, you were more likely to be assigned a task inside, such as working in the kitchen, or something where the jobs weren't as grueling. And so with that in mind, it makes really good sense that people who are considered to be, and this is not, actually, it doesn't make really good sense, but it lines up with society's image of feminine and masculine in terms of having the ability to like work hard and be assigned to outside, or to be allowed to work in other jobs that are considered less grueling. Although I have to say, working in a hot kitchen to me is a really grueling task if you're doing that for everybody all the time, especially in like the older buildings. But either way, I would say that probably lines up with where some of those ideas began to be embedded in people's judgments. And my dad's skin is quite a bit darker than mine. He's also an intellectual, and it's interesting to me how many people, like, their view of him isn't as dark as he is in memory, and then when they see a photo, they're like, oh yeah, that's right, your dad, blah blah blah. But their memory of him, because I talk of him as an intellectual, it's not assigned to be with the darker skin that he has. And folks that I know, as I said, not all in my family, but folks that I know, men who have lighter skin, they are considered to be, I don't know if durable is the word, but I would say sometimes when people are choosing for them, like what they might be able to handle, I've noticed that trend that like, oh, they should probably do something a little less tasking, lining up with that idea as though they couldn't handle something that were harder. So I didn't think about it that way, but it does line up now that you mentioned it. I don't know, Catherine, have you seen that for yourself?
Well, actually, you were just kind of making me think about the whole house and field slave thing, because there was that very much strong belief, like the lighter their slaves were, the more trustworthy they were, so that you could allow them in the house and then maybe they wouldn't steal as much, or so. Like there was like this really weird belief that the whiteness brought goodness into them so that they could be in the house, you know.
I love that you say it's a weird belief, because it is weird, although I think they would have thought it was reasonable. But I love that you say it's weird.
Oh yeah, I mean, because I mean, if you even read like some of the old slave narratives, or like the master's journals, I have a book somewhere where there's just like all these things, and they think they're just being so pious and sweet the way that they're talking about their mixed black slaves, but it's like I really think this slave is particularly intelligent because he's less black than, and then and he could be like dumb as hell, but he's got
Oh,
that
that's
to
terrible.
him, and so now all of a sudden he's put in a position that like everyone is like more resentful because not only is he an idiot, but he's lighter and he's favored, and he's not worthy of what he's doing, but he hits the point that they're looking for. So I've always been more mindful of that intelligence versus color, but I really like what Avita was talking about is that the femininity versus the masculinity, because when you were talking about it, I'm like, holy crap, yeah. I've never heard a dark man being called a pretty boy by anyone but black
Mm-hmm.
people,
Yes.
but if it's a mixed black man, oh, that's a pretty boy. It's and the thing is that pretty boy is not necessarily like it's like he's fancy, and so yeah, you kind of blew my mind with that one, but I really, I'm 45
Yeah,
years old
and
and I
not
know the
only that, when you think about things that are seen as masculine and feminine, so it's brawn, strength, power, brute strength, brute force, etc. And then for lighter skinned men, so like they see them, they call them more whiny, more emotional, things like that, like you said, pretty. And so what it does is it creates this sort of this weird sort of thing where darker skinned black people almost don't really get the space to be a full range human. They don't get the space to emote. They don't get the space to have feelings. They don't get the space to be soft. And on the flip side, people that are lighter skinned don't get a space to be hard, don't get a space to be, seen as powerful or strong, because of this like belief that softness has to do with being lighter and hardness has to do with being dark.
Mhm. And so that kind of
Yes.
goes back to like what someone was talking about, like discipline in the classroom, and I've been a teacher for 23 years, and it's been heartbreaking, to go into the office and, we've got a spectrum of Black children, but we've got the darkest children in there. I've been really lucky. The school that I'm working at this year, I haven't seen that. But a school that had 60% ethnic children, my Lord, the colorism. It's just disturbing, and we're all supposed to be educated teachers and stuff. And it's the most ignorant stuff that you could ever work with. And you tell people and they're like, yeah, that's them. What can we do? And it's like, what can you do? So, yeah.
Yeah,
I
right.
think
That's how.
education.
Oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just thinking education, the idea behind education is that like once you become educated, once you learn about it, that you're like immune to being part of the problem. And that is so wrong. It's very wrong, and it is dangerous for people because if you think that you're not capable of making these kinds of judgments, then you're less likely to be looking for them in yourself. So I think it's at the places where people are like, oh, we pay real close attention to this. I treat everybody the same. I'm really, really mindful to treat everyone the same. And it's like, that may be true, but like if you have two fires and you throw water on both of them because you're insistent that you're going to treat everyone the same, in one situation, you might extinguish it. And in the other one, that's going to go everywhere because perhaps that's a grease fire. So you need to actually be mindful and look at the situation more carefully and look at yourself and what are you equipped to handle and what do you need to do to actually solve whatever's happening to help that person through their emotions or whatever it is. They're not necessarily having the same emotional experience. You can't use the same tactic and expect the same response. So I think we have to be careful the more educated we consider ourselves to maybe amplify that magnifying glass on ourselves, and make sure that we're really paying more attention because I don't know, it's really easy. I see that too in schools. This idea that like I understand it, so I would never cause that problem. And I think actually it just means we have more tools to look at it. Avita, or you were saying something too?
No, I was saying that yeah, darker skinned children often get penalized much more harsher for essentially just being normal kids. Just because of them being darker, they're already seen as problematic. And I think what we also don't talk about that it does for us as a community is it places a stricture between darker skinned people and lighter skinned people, so that we're kind of sort of resenting each other. You know, darker skinned people are sort of resenting lighter skinned people for having this privilege. Or I even call it, what I call it is a warped privilege. It's actually a very warped privilege. So it is a sense of privilege. It absolutely is, but it's still very warped because you are a lighter skinned person. So you're like, I'm black. I do have a black experience, but I do have access to more privilege because of my close proximity to whiteness. But when I get around white people, I'm not white to them. I'm still black. So like I'm still receiving the same or some of the same discriminations that you receive, but also it is a privilege, but it's a very kind of warped privilege. So it's almost kind of hard to see it that way. And so what happens is, as darker skinned individuals, you begin to sort of be kind of angry, you know, with these people for having this privilege and either not being aware of it or even sometimes wielding it, you know, because I've been in the places where a light skinned person made fun of me for being, you know, darker skinned or treated themselves as if they were better than me. But it also creates this thing where you sort of put that on lighter skinned people of going, well, they automatically think that they're better than you because of this, when that may or may not be true. But so now you're feeling in your feelings, or you're feeling sort of a resentment towards them, and that influences how you interact with them. And then they're feeling hurt because they're like, well, hey, like, you know, I'm a part of this community too. I can't help that, you know, my skin was lighter. And so now they're reacting defensively to what they feel. And so it's kind of hard to show up in compassion. And it's like, hey, this is coming from a place of pain. It's not coming from a place of like personally being upset with you, but more about being upset with the system. But rather than us like see it as this is the system and this is the system and the effect that it's having on us, we sort of take that out on each other, and it keeps us further divided.
Yeah, what I can definitely,
oh, go ahead.
I wanted to add a little bit to that, and just about the feelings. I know for me, growing up, it was this feeling of like, there's something going on. There's something oppressive that's affecting me, but no one will really listen to it. And I've had it's now, because now that it's trendy to be dark skinned and now that it's trendy to be woke, people are talking about colorism now. So I'm glad that we can be here and having this having this conversation, because I remember bringing it up on Facebook and people saying, oh, you're divisive, oh, you must be jealous, oh, you're bitter. And those are already things that are just assigned to Black women and assigned to dark-skinned women anyway. So you're angry, you know, and it was just like, oh my goodness, I can't have these conversations. So it was people trying to pretend it wasn't exist. It was people in my community telling me, it was the community leaders, it was people I grew up with telling me, you need to be quiet, you need to not say that. Like, to me, it was like, you need to keep this problem hush, hush, girl. We don't talk about that. But it was very people, like, I felt like people were going to smash me down to not talk about this oppressive problem. And it was very much like, you are a dark skinned girl. If we cared about your problems, we would have asked you. And so that's how it can feel. And that's where the pain and if people want to say bitterness, but it's like you're going through life and you're seeing because representation matters too. So you're seeing the dark-skinned ghetto friend being casted on TV. You're seeing the kind of women who are picked and considered most feminine. You're seeing who's getting the jobs, you know. So it's like, this is really happening. So I think that's the hardest thing, is kind of feeling so isolated and like your community doesn't have your back. So it is hard to have compassion. I can say it's hard to have compassion when I meet mixed or like lighter skinned Black women or people, and they're telling me like, oh, I have these issues too, it can be kind of hard because I feel like even with like when I think about racism and privilege, if a white person tells me they're having a problem getting access to things and life, it's like, okay, I have compassion for you as a human being, but I have a little less compassion because it's harder for me. It's hard out here. And we're just now exploring, and people are, making dark girls are making documentaries. Now people are doing the research, and it's just crazy that it's like, you didn't believe me, that I'm glad you believed the research.
Yeah.
Well, racism is everywhere, right? But what you're talking about really makes me think of, it's not, so there's all this intersectionality, right? And a lot of it, like I think what you're describing is the focus on anti-Blackness, right? Anti-Blackness is a big thing. It's like racism is a thing, which can happen to a lot of people, and anti-Blackness is a thing that happens. It's within multiple cultures, right? It's why folks in Nigeria are bleaching their skin. They're the #1 purchasers of skin bleaching stuff. And it's really, really bad for you. And people do it anyway because they recognize that there is a benefit to them in society to have lighter skin. And so the anti-Blackness, I totally understand when you're saying, like, folks with lighter skin than me, they are affected by racism, but, is it the same kind of, effect? And I think if you look at anti-Blackness, the darker, more visibly darker you are, if there's a society that has a problem with darker skin, then it makes sense that the darker you are, the harder that experience would be. And I think that would create resentment. I think it would be it makes perfect sense that people who are experiencing more, I'm trying to think of what word, but basically a much harder effects from the,
like the less privilege,
Yeah.
the less privilege in society.
Right? So I think Avita was pointing out too that privilege is a tricky word. I'm trying to think. I usually, when I talk about white privilege, I think of it as like white immunity, because there are things that they're not subject to that people who are Black are subject to, right? So like,
or like
if
value,
you're sitting and you have a hood on, you might be just fine if you're white because you're just another person riding the bus. But if you're Black, then suddenly you're suspicious. But then with colorism, it's like, you have dark skin, you might be a little bit suspicious, but if you have dark skin, then you're probably pretty suspicious, and I'm going to kind of keep my eye on you because you're probably likely to do something, I just don't know what yet. So that's where that, like, because you're darker, this idea is that you're going to be like more likely to be a criminal. And then if you do mess up and make a mistake in life, you will be punished harder the darker your skin is. And that's something that's not, like Kiana, where you just said, now it's like popular to talk about it, and people are doing research on it, and then they share the facts, and you're like, thanks for understanding. Now I've had this life experience I've been sharing with you. And suddenly, because someone else deemed it worthy of pointing it out and writing a paper about what they observed, like things that I've experienced and shared with you, now suddenly it's valid. Like that's another space for resentment, right? I've been telling you this whole time, and yet you only believe it when somebody else reports on my experience rather than a firsthand account. It's a real thing.
And it's, being the educator, I always have to keep it going back to, we teach all of our children this, because kindergarten, the first time that teacher practices colorism, racism in front of the children, all the children watch it. And while they're still really young and they don't, pick up on the nuances and stuff like that, they grow up every single year. And if they're all growing up together, then eventually that one Black kid is always in trouble and is just like, nah. And it becomes a joke rather than, why is this teacher always doing this? And they're not being taught how to stand up for each other when darker people are being singled out. Like, hey, so it's just so heartbreaking, because then I think about our own experiences and how we learned this at school. We learned it in our media and stuff like that, but really the longest time that we spent our developmental times is in that classroom. And so how the children treated each other and the teachers didn't say anything about it, the way that the teachers did it, the way that admin did it, and nobody ever interrupted and pointed things out, we are brainwashed into this mentality.
I think also too, it really causes lighter skinned people to almost feel this need to like prove their blackness or like really assert it. And that's something that happens. Also, we got a question. Can we talk about Whoopi Goldberg and the issues that people had with her playing romantic leads? Because that was also something that we didn't really see was, darker skin. Like right now we have, Issa Rae and The Photograph, and we have Lupita Nyong'o. But like when I was coming up, that wasn't really a thing. Like, you mostly had like, a brown skinned black woman, playing a romantic lead, but like someone who was very, very dark, being seen as an object of desire. You would see that more for black men because you have that sort of like that black bull sort of mamba, like they were seen as the epitome of masculinity. But for black women and darker skinned black women specifically, it was almost like this thing of like this disbelief that they could be found attractive, that someone could find them desirable, that someone could want to have a romantic relationship with them, as opposed to someone who was lighter skinned. So like I even saw a thread recently where they were talking about all of these different movies and cartoons and things like that, where there were darker skin leads in the cartoon, but when they chose actresses for those roles, they picked lighter skinned women, because it was almost this like kind of belief of going like, if I put this dark skinned person in this role, no one's going to believe that they're the romantic lead because, darker skinned women aren't attractive.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you guys remember Spike Lee's movie School Days? When they have all the girls going into the hair salon, and it's, the darker sorority versus the lighters and stuff like that. I think I was like maybe 18 when I watched that, but it was like that was the first time that I saw that colorism was really like they nailed every single thing. And the whole point is they were all at the same black school. But that whole thing of, darker men only dating us lighter ones, like they're not going to date white women, but they'll date us, and then it's like, oh, and then you'll see other darker women. And so I'm like, no, this is love. But then you're like, oh no, this is colorism. Because then you find out, like with my ex-husband, I love my ex-husband, but I don't think he liked me. I really don't. He was always like, yeah, yella, and I'm Mandingo. And I'm like, why are we talking about color in our love? And so and I would see the looks of darker women when I was with him because he was a dark man, and I'm like, am I supposed to apologize that I have him because I met him and I fell in love with him? I hope he fell in love with me. We have a beautiful son. But I mean, just walking with a black man as I'm a black woman, people are like, no, you're mixed. And I'm like, you don't get it. So yeah, that
Right.
Spike Lee video show, I mean, that just opened up my eyes on colorism so much.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, actually, because as a darker skinned woman myself, I can identify with having those feelings. And it was not really that I was mad at the woman so much as it's just that reminder of kind of always being passed over,
Mm-hmm.
And always being seen as not as valuable, not as attractive. I even deal with it in my polyamory because, I'm married to a black man and we're non-monogamous. And I definitely notice that I feel a lot more insecurity when his other partners are lighter skinned women than when they're darker skinned women. I feel a little bit more of like, maybe he finds them more attractive than he finds me, even though that's like not something that he has echoed or that he has, acted like, but it's within me because of this, my own like personal like ranking of like what, and it's not even that I hold that as personally attractive because I just find pretty much everything attractive, but like knowing that the greater society at large sees things this way. And so like even this belief of like going like, if I'm out with him and somebody sees me with him and somebody sees, him with his other partner and the other partner might be lighter, they're thinking he probably finds that person more attractive or he likes that woman more than he likes his wife. And like all the stuff that I was going through on the inside about it, And I love being dark skinned. I feel beautiful as a dark skinned woman, while very much understanding that this is the way society kind of works. And so it's like, it's almost like if you're lighter skinned, you're still black, but it's like a more preferred way to be black. So it's like, well, if you have to be black, then you should be, as close to whiteness as possible. And that's a little bit more okay. You're still black, you know what I mean? So you're still going to get treated like a black person, but it's almost easy to sort of not really forget that you're black, but it's just not as prominent. So it's not as prominent of a reminder. And that does come with, like I said, this sort of warped sense of privilege. But it's also very relative too, because if you are now finding yourself in a place where you are the darkest person in the room, because also we have to understand that darkness and lightness is relative. So Alex, Amanda and Catherine, in this panel, you're lighter, but if you were in a room full of white people, you're the darkest person. And so it's this very relative sort of thing that's kind of situational, but at the same time, and it's so pervasive. I remember sitting on I was doing a live video about polyamory, and this was actually for Indian people, so people actually in India. And I remember someone asking the question and saying they don't feel like they could be non-monogamous because they didn't feel like they would get multiple partners because they were dark-skinned. And it was so weird to me because I was like, I'm literally a dark-skinned person sitting here talking about my experience in non-monogamy and talking about having multiple partners right before you, and they just couldn't see that for themselves. And it was because of their dark skin, because they just had dark skin as this thing of like, this is undesirable. And when you're receiving those messages, even if you're not getting them on a personal level, you're still internalizing them because they're out there in society. How does that shape what you believe you're worthy of?
That
are you worthy
rings
of
so true.
Are you worthy of abundance, prosperity, a job? All of those things that really begins to shape what you think you have access to in the world.
Right. Like the idea when people say, like, Kiana, you used this word, and when people would say to me as a compliment, you're so exotic looking. And it's like, okay, so I hear that you think like that word, you think it's a compliment, but what it says to me is, you're pretty, but from like out of place. Like you don't actually belong here. And so you don't look like anyone else, but that in itself, its uniqueness makes you pretty. But like if you were around everyone else, it's not like you're pretty in general. You're pretty because you're so different. And I feel like that's really a harsh way for people to be in. What Avita was saying in terms of, people with darker skin thinking, I'm probably not going to be seen as attractive. I wonder if it's really so much that people don't think they're pretty, or more that they don't think that they would be preferred, right? You can think something is pretty or someone is pretty, but then the difference of like, yeah, that's pretty, you're pretty, but I still have this preference for, the blonde hair, blue-eyed person, or even darker people with lighter eyes, or darker people with lighter hair. There are a lot of people who even will weave in lighter hair or different colors into their hair, and that kind of changes other people's perceptions of them. And I remember being really saddened when I read about if you hit like your 30s and you are a Black person, it's more likely that your white counterpart will have married, divorced, and married again before you get married. But even if you look within the Black community, people with a lighter dark skin are 50% more likely to be married or be in a romantic relationship than those with darker skin at the same stage in their life. So it's not just like, hey, I think this about myself. It's that message that's so sent out into society that then when people are choosing their partners, I think there is that idea of, yeah, you're pretty, but when you want to partner up, you were a fun, exotic, relationship to have, and now I'm going to go and find my steady rock. And darker people aren't considered that steady rock. Although what surprises me is the number of folks who will be so loyal and stay by people through really, really rough times. So it's not like anyone has ever been like, oh, they're just flighty, they won't be around. People are people. it's not, there's nothing about your dark skin that's going to make you less of a partner than someone with lighter skin. But that is what society puts out on us. Kiana, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because I'm always just thinking about, just like, well, I mean, because colorism, as a whole, because it's proximity to to whiteness. So it's about the white supremacy of it all, no matter what country that is. If that's India, I mean, I had an experience in Brazil where, whereas in other places where the more black you are, the more black looking you are, the less access and the more masculine or the more like criminal people think you are. And I remember going into a shop and the women had lighter skin and they wouldn't even sell things to me. And we couldn't speak the same language, but I could peep the shade, and I was like, oh, I can't escape colorism. Like, dang. But they were like trying to sell the clothes to the like white woman in front of me. They didn't want me to go into the fitting room. And if I didn't really need pants, I wouldn't have bought them. But I ended up asking a native and they were like, oh yeah, they think dark skinned women are prostitute, dark skinned men are criminals. And so they have it's Portuguese. So it's like the Portuguese. So if you look more Portuguese, you just get more credit, it seems like. And then when we look at the research of just because I'm 30, so like just desirability and settling down, and when I look at this research, I'm like, this is a real thing. So not only do I have to battle with the inner insecurities that colorism brings, I'm faced with the reality that society is treating me a certain way. But when I say like exotic, I just realized for me personally, sometimes people are going to not give me the benefit of the doubt or like knock me down because of colorism. But I do notice that I do feel like I'm still desired by a lot of different ethnicities, by a lot of men in the Black community, just all types of men. So I'm like, okay, that's cool too. But I do feel like there is some kind of underlining like sinister subconscious disadvantages when it comes to partnering. And as a woman, like, yeah, my career is great too, but being partnered is very important as well. Or just, anybody.
Actually, this is funny that we're talking about attraction because I saw a post recently. So there have been a number or a couple of like really big profile cases about blackfishing.
Yeah.
I know there was one that's like an author, and there was another one. She was
College professor.
with a school. She was a
She was
professor
a
or
college
something.
professor.
Oh, what professor?
Right. They both had pretended to be Black, and someone made a post sort of correlating how that people that are not Black know the like capitalism that lighter skinned Black individuals have within the POC community. And so they may be like people that like didn't have what would be seen as attractive features in white society. And so that like propelled them to kind of like blackfish because it's like, okay, like, I'm not going to have this attractiveness in white society. I might have a large, I might be larger, just all of those things that we know aren't seen as attractive in white society that is seen as attractive in our communities. And so it sort of like goes, okay, I know that here in this space, I don't have it in my actual ethnicity, but if I sort of pretend to be this ethnicity, now I have this sort of attraction privilege that I would not have had if I would have just been honest about like who I was, and like how that sort of fuels this like, like phenomena that we see now of people kind of blackfishing and pretending to be Black because it's them like trying to gain this sort of social capital that they don't have in their actual ethnicity because of this knowledge that being closer to whiteness while still being Black gives you privilege in the POC community.
That is awful.
Yeah, and I love that you said that.
I feel that like I could be thinking I'm pretty and be rather ugly, but because my skin's a little lighter, people would tell me I'm pretty. That's terrible. That's really terrible. And it's terrible that you can just say like a whole, oh, wow. I didn't know that story. Sorry, Catherine, you were going to say something too.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of blew my mind again, because that's kind of the evilness of that word, exotic. because all my life, where are you from? Are you from Bali? And I'm like, I don't even know where Bali is. And they're like, well, what are you? And I'm like, and I say Black, white, and Indian. They're like, oh. And then I see the anti-Blackness, because if I was going to be from Bali or Tahiti or something, oh, they want to, whoa, right? But I'm Black and Native American. That's not exotic. And so that idea of a white woman being able to say that she has exotic features, really that exotic means not white.
That's what anti-Blackness is. The anti-Blackness isn't, I would think, where you said you were from. It's the fact that you have to explain why your skin is in any way dark. Like, oh, your skin looks a little bit dark. Why is that? Because I've made this little joke to myself about asking people who are white the questions that I get asked, like, can I cut your hair? And they always look at me like, you weirdo. And I think exactly. It's a very weird thing. Or the thing, if it's like, well, where are you from? Where are your like your history, your ancestors from? I don't know. Oh, it's okay that you don't know? Like, I can't ask you like how your skin is so light. I mean, granted, we're in Oregon, we get very little sun. So it's like, I mean, pretty much I think that makes sense in this region, which is where skin colors come from. It's regional, right? But the question of like, oh, what are you, is really an acceptable way, or a more acceptable way to say, like, how is it that your skin appears to have darkness? Oh, let me explain to you. It comes from over here. Oh, that makes more sense. Now I understand why you have brown skin, because otherwise the norm would be everyone would have white skin. So because you don't have that, it means you're different. And so I need to know exactly where that came from. It's not acceptable that people ask that kind of question unless they're really looking for, like, hey, I have a little bit of heritage that seems like it might be similar to yours. I wonder, it'd be kind of cool if we had a similar background. Like, I have people with Black skin in my family, people with white skin in my family, and my mom's family has Native American, but I don't usually claim it, and so does my dad, because I didn't have a connection to that culture. I don't know any of the stories or the history, or have a working memory, like an intellectual memory of those experiences. I'm sure my body's holding memory of the experiences I had, but I don't have the story. I don't have the history. So I feel like to really claim that heritage, I need to have a connection to it. And I think that a lot of people with white skin, they came here and they're like, who cares? I got away from whatever I wanted to get away from. And then it wasn't important to say exactly where my heritage came from. So a lot of people I know, they're like, oh, I'm Caucasian, which is like, there's no Caucasia in the world. So we don't know where that's from. But it's really important that you as a Black person can name exactly where you got your Black skin from. And I need to know, like, oh, that's why you're not as dark as that person, or that's why you seem lighter. Okay, because there's other skin tones mixed in there. But we never say, like, oh, I see, that's why your skin burns so easily. I understand better. Like, we don't usually do that with folks with lighter skin.
But
So
do you feel like that's just to get away for them to calibrate how they're going to treat you? Because I mean, that's how I've always taken it, is you want to know how Black I am, so that you can decide, what are you going to say in front of me? What am I going to allow? I just feel like it's a calibration.
But it's not thought about, right? It's this thing that people I don't think that people are mentally, like, I don't think people are consciously making these assessments. I think that it's so much deeper than that. Like, oh, you've got dark skin. I have a feeling about you having dark skin, so I need more information about this. Can you tell me about your dark skin? Like, did you just come here from Africa, where I have a fear about how people might behave if they come from a tribe in Africa? Or did you come from Mexico, where I have feelings about people who came here from Mexico? Or did you come here from, it's like that whole thing. It's not, that's in the United States. And I realize colorism is global. And Kiana, Brazil, my understanding, is one of the much stronger countries for colorism being a really big factor in how you're treated within groups of color, having that really strong difference in how you're treated. So yeah, that's a good point though, Catherine. Like, it it is like, how am I going to treat you without thinking about it?
Yeah, do I have to really think when I'm speaking around you? Are you really black or are you just black? You know, it's great. I really want to know, like Kiana and Avita, like, are you guys ever asked where are you from?
Occasionally I'm asked where I'm from just because people assume that I am either Caribbean or I dress Afrocentric at times. And so people often ask that question. I get that exotic question too, mostly about like how, like I said, how I dress, how I present myself. I, dress kind of out there. So that's when I'll get those questions like, where are you from? I remember recently, what the heck was I? I was somewhere and I had on this, I had gone to the mission in the San Juan Capistrano mission because I actually live in San Diego. And I had on this like beautiful, like African print, outfit. And I remember a white woman there asking me, she was like, oh, your outfit is so pretty. And she was like, where are you from? And I was like, San Diego. So like, I get that sometimes where people ask me where I'm from. But like not a whole lot because people just kind of assume it's more about how I'm dressed. So like if I don't have on African clothes and I just have on regular attire, then usually I'm just seen as, okay, you're just an African American person. It's usually if I have on something that's a little bit more Afrocentric or looks a little bit more quote unquote exotic, that where I'll get those questions where people will ask if I'm from the Caribbean or if I'm from Africa or something like that. But it's not something that's super, super common.
So you weren't like, you didn't grow up hearing from a little child, what are you? Where are you from?
No, not at all. Not at all. Because I'm very easily seen as that's a black person, because of my black skin. So, and then I grew up around a lot of black people. So it just wasn't something that we asked each other. Like I said, people sometimes assume that I was Caribbean. But outside of that, I rarely got asked, where are you from? Where are you from? That mostly has to do with how I'm dressed more so than just like how I look.
And what about you, Kiana?
She said she was having connection issues, so it might be possible. Hopefully she bounced up again. So I'm actually going to ask you two a question because this was something that came up in some of the like research I was kind of doing, trying to ask people about colorism and whatnot. And so this was a thing that came up that I was really surprised that people had these very strong and polarized sort of opinions about, and that was the topic of reverse colorism. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard the term the beige rage and stuff like that and reverse colorism and that, so a lot of people were really, really, really like very polarized on this belief of like whether or not it exists or whether or not it doesn't, because, if you take the cultural context of colorism, what it is the devaluing of people based on their skin being darker. Like that's how it shows up in society. So like, yes, colorism is sort of this ranking of people based on skin color, but like our current cultural framework for it is that if you're darker skin, you're on the lower end of that that valuation system. And so same like how they say, reverse racism isn't a thing because even though like if you look in the dictionary, the definition of racism is, being discriminated against based on skin color, but we also have to take in the cultural context of how that shows up. Is how that shows up is white people are on the top, black people are on the bottom, and so that's how that goes. And so like reverse racism isn't a thing in this culture, in this current cultural context, because the people that have the power are white people. So like a white person can be discriminated against, but they can't experience reverse racism because the current system of racism favors them. On the same vein, it's the same thing about colorism, but there were so many, like it was very, I was really surprised at like how how strongly people felt about this. And so I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on this, because it wasn't even something that I had really thought about. As I lived in a black, my dark skinned body. I hadn't really thought about that. Like I was just like, okay, colorism is a thing. This is how it shows up, and this is how we're affected by it. But it was a very, very, very like charged topic that I didn't even really like think about myself personally. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that topic specifically.
So I just want to clarify, reverse colorism, would that be, if we reversed it, that folks who have darker skin would theoretically have more privilege than the lighter skinned people of color? Is that what it looks like?
What people were using as examples of reverse colorism is like being a lighter skinned person and having people be mean to you because you're lighter skinned, or think that you're better than, think that you're better than them because you're lighter skinned, or you may have, like, I remember different people talking about, they got chased home from school by the darker skinned girls because the lighter skinned, the girls were upset that they thought this person thought that they were better than them, and so like, so like that kind of stuff, or someone calling them you red bone or just whatever. And so that was that was what they were using as examples of reverse colorism. And I was like, that's more like examples of bullying, or that's like an effect of colorism. So the effect of colorism and this sort of devaluing darker skinned people creates this occurrence where they don't trust you, or they have resentment towards you, and they act out and they project that resentment on you. But is that actually colorism? Because colorism, the system as it exists today, is the devaluing of the darkest of us. And so, like, it was this whole like thing where people were really, really like charged about like whether or not reverse colorism is a thing, and like even like defining what that is and defining what the effects of colorism are, as opposed to actual colorism. So like, so racism is the system where, white people are on the top, but one effect of that is a white person growing up in a all Black neighborhood might be receiving, being teased or picked on or whatever, not because, because of them being white, and Black people sort of resenting the privilege that they have. And so that's an effect of racism, but it's not necessarily reverse racism. And so there was this whole conversation about whether or not reverse colorism was actually a thing. And there was a lot of, like I said, really emotionally charged responses around that. Go ahead, Kiana.
Oh, I'm back. I was having some connection issues.
What we're talking about now is reverse colorism.
Well, we were talking about there was a question about colorism, but I don't remember.
Oh, I was wondering if you had had you like lived your life being asked where are you from, what are you, and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll go back to that, because I definitely have some stuff about that one. So yes. Oh, did she freeze again?
I think she did.
Darn it.
I really want her answer to the question too.
I know, right? Maybe I won't ask the question when she comes back. So
let me share on what you were asking about. In my view, reverse racism doesn't exist, because it doesn't mean that people can experience prejudice, people can experience discrimination, people can be treated poorly for their stereotypes, or for their skin color be treated really poorly. But to me, the term racism is related to the system itself, systemic racism. So in your example of a Black town with a white person who is being treated poorly, I'm thinking in that space, is that white person more likely to be denied a loan?
Of course, I'm still struggling, guys.
Okay. We'll bring back the question that we had for you, Kiana. Is it okay if I finish answering this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, and my view of what that looks like, it's everything that's set up in a certain way for the benefit of one group over another. And so in that town, I don't think that the rules in that town would be set up to the advantage. Now, the individual people who are making those decisions might have their own ideas, and they can be, they could choose to discriminate against somebody with white skin. And so in terms of colorism and reverse colorism, I think if we look at colorism as the idea that it is an extension of white supremacy that's happening within the group of people of color, and it's global. It's not just in the United States, although my experience is only in the United States. I know that like if you go to Korea, they even lighten their skin, and they already have light skin. They want it lighter. So it's not just in the United States, but there is a benefit to having lighter skin. And so, yes, I did experience the idea of like, you're not truly Black. You're not really one of us, which really feels alienating because I know I'm not white. I don't get to fit in with the white folks, but I am alienated from the group who doesn't see me as having the same experiences that they do, which I probably didn't. But even if I did, they don't see it that way. And it really makes sense to me to have some resentment for folks who are being treated differently because they're lighter, and you can't choose the color of your skin. I can't choose the color of my skin. It makes zero sense to me that somebody would be treated differently or attributed different value, different intelligence levels, different capabilities, different morality. Like, oh, you must be a criminal because you have darker skin. That does make. I feel like we all reset. Is everybody there?
Yeah.
Okay. So in my feeling, I don't connect with the idea of reverse colorism, although I know that white supremacy has set a value on lighter skin, and that affects all of us. It affects people who are darker. It affects people who have brown skin. It affects people who have really light brown skin. It affects people who have white skin. It affects all of us. And even within the group of people of color, it does affect us, and it doesn't help us. It doesn't help us feel unified. It doesn't help us feel, and there is a very clear distinction, like, oh, you're light skinned. Okay, what do you want me to do about that? I realize it changes my experience, although I wonder why it's important to call that out when you're just describing how this person looks. But it's very connected to our society's caste system, right? It's important to figure out where people are in this hierarchy in our world, because we don't run on just this idea of we're all in this together. We're in this idea, our culture is very independent. And so you need to figure out exactly where you have power and who you have power over and who you're under. And unfortunately, this is the way that it's determined. And it hurts all of us. And so, yeah, sometimes people who have more privilege in a space are going to be feeling that people who have less privilege are resentful. And that makes perfect sense to me. It doesn't make me happy. I want to love everybody, but it makes sense because I'm also human, and I've had feelings like that too.
Well, and it's interesting because I just remember my Blackness being policed all throughout middle school and high school by other Black children. And so if I was reading a book, they'd be like, you ain't Black, you reading. And I'm like, a Black woman gave me this book, And then when I started playing cello in high school, I was carrying around the cello all the time. And they'd be like, you ain't Black. And I'm like, my cello instructor's Black. Like, what are you talking about? But it was like every time I did something, it came down to that I wasn't exhibiting Blackness, and I would just be sitting there, just be sitting there. But, obviously there's something else going on. There's, esteem going on, and I'm an easy target and stuff. But it was always interesting, to hear like the light bright, or you're ambiguous, no one knows what you are, it's, and I used to get resentment of being so light. Like if I was just darker, people would leave me alone. And I know that's not true. It would just be some people would leave me alone while more people would bother me. But it was like I just would yearn for darker pigmentation so that I could read in private. I can play, cello in private and just be left alone. Because on the white side, it'd be like, oh, you're reading. Or, oh, you play cello, like that's attributed to their contribution to my bloodline, when it's like, no, my mother just made sure that I had exposure to people. And so, one person would give me books, another person's like, why don't you start playing cello? I was influenced.
Yeah.
Do you call it reverse colorism? Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, as I was talking and having these conversations, it was actually super frustrating for me because I was like trying to have these dialogues about it and just say, hey, like, let's talk about this thing. And so many people, I could tell, were so activated and were so triggered, both light-skinned people and dark-skinned people. And it was very baffling for me because, like, I was like, I feel like I said, I feel like the lighter skinned people should be, or their response to this should be, I recognize like my closer proximity to whiteness gives me a sort of warped privilege. And so because of that space, it has caused me to be at odds with my darker skinned brothers and sisters, and that's not personal, that's not directed at me, that's directed at the system. And I hate that this system has done that so that I can't connect to these people that I'm very much a part of, in this community that I'm very much a part of. Let me use my space of privilege to amplify and talk about this and highlight the plight of darker skinned people that are more marginalized than I am. And then on the flip side, as darker skinned people, it's like, damn, I hate that the system of racism has placed me at odds with my other Black people that are lighter skinned than I am, and has created this space where I can't really connect to them because I'm feeling this resentment for this privilege that they've been given that they didn't ask for, because they didn't choose the color of their skin, same the way I did. Let me make sure that I'm speaking out about my experiences and that I'm also not alienating them, in the process, because, we're all being affected by this negatively. So like, yes, in a real time statistics, like, brick and mortar, brick and mortar sort of example, darker skinned people are just more marginalized. They have less job opportunities. They're more criminalized. They're even more sexualized, which is another thing that I was going to talk about. Like, you know what I mean? They just have an experience that devalues them the most, but it doesn't necessarily mean that lighter skinned Black people are sort of moving through the world with just, like, it's like, oh, okay, well, you're almost like white people. It's like, well, sort of, but not quite. Like, you know what I mean? Like that only exists like here with us, and that only exists like in that privilege sort of only extends to when I'm in like my community. But like when I get outside of my community, I'm actually interacting with white people. I'm still a Black person to them. I might be a more preferable Black person, but I'm still Black. Like at the end of the day, at the bottom, I'm still, as long as I got that one drop, I'm still seen as Black. And so it's like, do I really have more privilege though? It's sort of this kind of like weird, I actually experienced this myself personally, because I have a queer identity, I'm bisexual, but because I'm cisgender and I'm femme presenting, it's very easy for me to sort of hide behind like heteronormativity, because like, unless I go out of my way to tell someone, hey, by the way, I'm queer, they won't really know that. And so it does give me a privilege that more marginalized queer identities don't have. And I need to be aware of that, because I need to use that space of privilege to sort of amplify, the plights of people that are more marginalized than me in the queer community. But that doesn't mean that I don't receive some form of pain from that sort of queer erasure and like not being seen as queer enough in the queer community. And because I talk about these things and I learn about these things, I understand it, so I don't take it personal. I understand why that is. Just like you said, you understand the resentment, but it also doesn't mean that I'm not experiencing some pain at this sort of having to prove my queerness, or like for you having to prove your Blackness, or having to prove you're down enough for the cause. I also understand too that some of that gatekeeping in the Black community, especially when it comes to lighter skinned individuals and people that have more close proximity to whiteness, is the some of the like violence that lighter skinned individuals can inflict in our communities because of that closer proximity to whiteness. So it's almost like okay, like I really got to double check that you're safe. So it's not me sort of like it's not me sort of doubting your Blackness, but it's going like, how down are you? Because, if I let you in the community just because you have the DNA, but you've had your lived experience as a lighter skinned individual, like what kind of harm are you going to be bringing into the community, because of you having this closer proximity to whiteness? So it's like it's this weird space of going like, I don't know that I necessarily consider myself a gatekeeper, but do I understand some of the gatekeeping and why it is? Absolutely.
But it's also so false, because a lot of the folks, I mean, hello, Attorney General, there are people I know. I'm sorry to bring it
No,
up,
you're
but
right though, because he's a Ben
it's not
Cartman.
your skin that's going to
He's so
say
wrong.
And
that you have
brown
accepted white
skin,
supremacy.
brown,
Yeah,
brown. Okay.
that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not, there is no real correlation between the lightness of your skin and your acceptance of white supremacy. It's there. And some people really just accept it and say, well, oh yeah, well, you know, it's so ingrained. I think when people, for me, and this could just be just a thought I have, but it's really hard for me to accept. It's so unreasonable to accept that folks who truly understand the larger sense of what's happening are actually accepting it. I'm much more apt to believe that it's it's not it's not fully felt, it's not fully discovered. It's this idea that the adherence to the ideal that we get what we've earned, which is like that whole American dream, like you get whatever you've earned. So if you are willing to work harder, you'll get what you want, just like everybody else. Don't make us seem like we are at a disadvantage or a victim. Like when you do that, you devalue Black people. So, you know, just go ahead, you know, do your work, and then you'll get what you deserve, because that's what I want to believe. And I think that's really idealistic, and I think that that's why people sometimes will stick with that, is because it feels better to think that you have more power and agency than we really do. But that's not tied to how light your skin is or how dark your skin is as a person of color, because some people of color who are very dark really believe in this. And I can see that as a really strong hope and a really strong sense of like, I don't want to be a victim. And so I refuse to see myself as a victim. And we see ourselves and we act as what we see ourselves. And therefore I'm choosing to believe that however hard I work, that's where I'll get to. And if you believe it too, you can do it. It's not connected to our skin, but I do understand the idea of kind of vetting, because even I do that, right? Like before I start talking about certain things, it's like you want to get a sense of like, does this resonate? Like, do you get what I'm talking about if I say these things? Like if I tell you that my, my child's name or my cousin's name, are you going to be like, that's a weird name? You know, like where does it come from? Is it, I remember going and getting my hair cut, and the lady cutting my hair, first of all, if I went to like a regular place, oh, we don't cut that kind of hair. So my hair right now, I did a really bad job. I tied it into this bun. This is an extreme privilege because I never go out with my hair like this. And then I was doing too many things today, and I was like, I want to be on this panel, and I know my understanding of time is very different than how time really is. And if I take the time to do my hair, I will not make it to the panel, so I will do it this way. So this is just a way that I did it. But normally my hair is a lot curlier. And so you go somewhere and they're like, oh, we don't cut that kind of hair. And so then I'm like, okay, well, where can I go? Where they cut? They go to the barber shop. They'll cut your kind of hair. So I go, and the lady was really, really nice. And the first thing she tells me is, ooh, your hair, it's very different hair. You need to flat iron this. And I just thought, really? Because I came here because you're Black, and I was hoping you would be like, oh yeah, your hair's fine as it naturally is. Let me just cut it for you. And instead you tell me I need to flat iron it. Like, that's not how I do
all the curl, ruin your hair, you know?
Yeah. I'm like, that's, I don't understand. Like, it's not curly enough to be the style that you're used to cutting. And so therefore it needs to be changed into like flat hair so that it can be, but I never flat iron my hair. So if you flat iron it and cut it, it's going to look really weird when it curls up when some water hits it. So yeah, I really think that it's just this sense of, what is it that we have agency over? Where do we get to, if I'm going to talk about my hair, I'm going to talk about it with other people who I think kind of get it. And so I might vet them a little bit for like, oh, have you ever had the experience where like you go in and they're like, I don't cut your kind of hair. And I feel like, no. And maybe I won't share that experience with them. And that makes perfect sense because there's so much judgment over experiences that are unique. And so you want to find someone who can accept that, right? For me, I'm like, oh, your experience is incredibly different. That's cool. Let me learn about it. But unfortunately, that's not how America presents things. It's not like, hey, get curious. Let's learn about other cultures. Let's learn about other languages. Let's find out how people do things and what makes everyone, operate in different ways. That's not the melting pot that the United States is. The United States is like, hey, you can be however you want to be and you can be whoever you want to be, but we might not like you and you might not get to do what you want to do if you want to do that and do it over there. And it's just not welcoming. So I don't blame anyone for vetting other folks. And by vetting, I mean having a little bit of a conversation to see if that's a safe person to have a conversation with.
Well, I think really that vetting thing goes back to, looking to see, are you consciously Black or are you just a Black American? Because we have freaking Candace Owen, we've got the Ben Carsons, we've got now that AG where you find out he's actually married to the granddaughter of the Mitch Connell. So like he's only doing his stuff for himself. He's not doing anything for Black people. And so that's always been like this impetus for me where I've been like, then I do have light skin privilege. I'm going to use it. So I see that there's an equity. I'm going to speak it because what are they going to do? Fire me? Because I can already be like, oh, but you told me this is what you wanted me to do. You wanted me to point these things out. You said that you wanted a mixed person here. I'm pointing it out. Oh, did you not vet me? Because I'm conscious. I'm not unconscious. So I'm not going to just be your color to be like, yes, sir, no, sir. I'm going to be like, I see the eyeballs from the girl right over there. So I'm going to say what I bet she wants to be, wants to be said. It's just like I'm the voice piece until someone else starts getting comfortable and then they start talking too. But it's like, it would be wrong for me to be conscious, light, and able to say the things that needs to be said. And so, I mean, I kind of feel like that's like the position of mixed people, is that we are the bridge, and it's not a responsibility that should ever have been given to us, but it is our position in the world. We get to say and do a lot of things that Black people, pure Black people can do, and also what pure white people can't do, and so we've got some power that we just don't know because we're always being sucked into the more dominant issue rather than letting us just be within who we are.
Right. And I think it's very important. And that was actually something I hadn't even really thought about, when these conversations come up of that, like this belief that if you have lighter skin, that you may not be as quote unquote down for the cause, because there are plenty of dark skinned people and, more brown skinned people that I would not, say I'm in alignment with like how they view race and how race shows up, that's saying all skin folk and kinfolk, because anti-Blackness is very pervasive. And just because you're walking around with dark Black skin doesn't mean that you align with the ideologies of Black liberation, of kind of getting rid of these things like respectability politics and having this like right and wrong way to be Black. Like there are some very dark skinned people that are very, very, very anti-Black.
Oh, yeah.
And so just looking at this person and going, oh, okay, well, they have darker skin, so they're safe, or this person has lighter skin, so they're not safe, can kind of get you hemmed up, because you'll actually end up having an individual. And I think that's really what the important piece is just, we need to move away from this space where we're sort of doing these like flash judgments of people based on what we see. So we're looking at this person and we're going, okay, this is a light-skinned Black person. This is what they must think. They must think that they're better than me. They must, walk around with their head, in the air and their nose in the air and their shit don't stink. And they're just moving through life, without a care in the world because they're light-skinned, because that's what I'm seeing. And then on the flip side, looking at this darker skinned person and saying, okay, well, this person is more Black. They have a more Black experience, because you don't know. It's very important to interact with people as individuals, because you'll be surprised at what you experience. I also think too that these conversations are super important, because there may be lighter skinned people that don't even know that it is sort of like their role to take on that place of privilege, to do that, speak. Number one, because they're just not even like aware that this may be an experience, depending on like how they grew up. But also kind of checking yourself to go, okay, how much of this privilege, it's this conversation where people go, well, I'm not aware that I have this privilege, but then when they get the opportunity to sort of use that privilege to speak up, they feel sort of a a trepidation to do so, because it's like, okay, if I become this mouthpiece and I began to talk about these things, am I going to lose this privilege that I'm quote unquote like not like I say that I'm not aware of? But it's like, okay, then why are you feeling sort of a resistance to speak out? Is because you low key kind of know that this is something that you have and you don't want to lose it.
Or they're not really understanding, you know, like, hey, there is this space where people will listen more to you. And so if you're just listening to your friend and you're like, yeah, I agree, but you don't say anything, I mean, there could be lots of reasons why somebody is that way, that have, you know, it could be part of their anxiety or other things that are going on with that one person, right? So I wouldn't say like, hey, everybody should be speaking up, because maybe that's not a healthy choice for you for some reason, in terms of like as you are as a being. But in terms of when you're looking to have some agency or advocacy for other people, I think you have to be aware that something's going on. And so people who buy into the idea of like, oh no, you're only treated that way because of your behavior. Like if you had been more respectful, they would have treated you more respectfully. So if you buy into that, then I could see someone not choosing to step up because they're saying, well, you behaved that way, that behavior gets this kind of treatment. So why did you need me to say anything? I mean, you brought that upon yourself. So I think it requires more awareness than I would attribute it to a sense of, I know I'm privileged and I'm being quiet so that I don't lose my privilege, right? I think that people need to understand what's happening, and that takes work to become aware. And then once you're aware, if you choose not to, then I would be like, you're out of the club, but that's rude. You know what I mean? But really, like, you're making a conscious choice to protect yourself in some way. And if somebody makes that choice, I would just say, well, then that's a space to kind of dig in and say, like, what's going on? Why am I choosing this? And it's, you know, who am I protecting, and what am I seeing? What are my values that I'm saying here with these actions or inaction? I know a lot of people. What's interesting is I remember, I don't think so much now, but for a long time when I was younger, and I'm saying younger, like high school, people would say that I was stuck up. And I'm like, how could I have been stuck up? Like my goal in life is to be open and accepting and caring about all the people that come in. And so for me to do that, I have to give myself space to know them. And I also have to kind of assess the environment, like what's going on here. I can't have a sense of how I can interact in a space if I'm not observing first. Like if I walk into the room with my mouth open, I'm not seeing what's coming in. And so what I used to do a lot more, and I actually put more effort to this now, is to come into a space and observe what's actually happening for the different people I'm interacting with. And that can be seen as stuck up, because there's also that sense of, well, when you come in, like, join the group, show that you want to be a part of everybody. If you're not talking with folks and engaging, then maybe you think you're too good. Sorry, I think
too, that is kind of one of those ways. And I mean, I understand that, you know, like colorism is actually a very real thing. It has real consequences. It has like real world examples, but also one of the things that I struggle with as just a Black person in general is I feel like we just cannot exist. Like I literally just can't just exist. And I feel like this is a way that we do that to each other. So like you're light skinned, you walk into a room of Black people, you literally didn't say anything. You just existed. You're stuck up. You know, if I'm a dark skinned person and I walk into a room and there's a light skinned woman there and I don't know, I just looked at her, but I didn't smile, or, you know, for whatever reason, I don't know, I stubbed my toe before I came in the room, you know what I mean? And so like my face wasn't necessarily happy, you know,
and you're just being closed off.
Right, yeah, you must be jealous of me, you know what I mean? Because, you know, I'm lighter skinned, and it's like I literally we just can't like exist without having something negative attached to our existence simply just by way of just being. Like, you know what I mean? It's like I literally just showed up to the room and automatically I'm jealous, I'm stuck up, I'm rude. You know, it's like, why can't we just look at each other from like eyes of affirmation instead of like
And
eyes of like
whatnot.
derision? Like the minute we look at each other, we're already cutting the other one down in another way. Well, this person is light skinned, so they think they're better than me. That person is dark skinned, so they're ghetto or they're angry or whatever, blah, blah, blah.
But they're
And
not
it's like,
thinking about it. I mean,
right.
that's the part that's awful, is that like I wouldn't think that someone would. Okay, so if you walked in a room and with your example and you're like, and I'm not smiling and I'm just kind of looking, and it's like people are going to look at me like I'm judging them because they're light skinned or something, or I can't remember your exact example. So the interesting thing is, if you came into a room and you didn't say anything and you looked at me but didn't say anything, I'm not thinking, oh, Avita is just not reaching out to me because I'm light skinned, right? But I am feeling like, there's another dark skinned person there and they're not reaching out to me. I wonder if I'm not dark enough to be considered a part of, who she identifies with. You know what I mean? But this is a feeling. The feeling is coming from all that stuff that is there. It hasn't even formed a thought yet. This is like a feeling I have, and that feeling might affect whether or not I'm like, oh, hey, what's up? Which I probably wouldn't be if I'm feeling insecure. I might be like, I'll just wait and see if this person approves of me. If they approve of me as a dark enough person, then they'll come and approach me. But if they don't, then apparently I'm not dark enough to be considered a part of that club. So I'll just keep mingling and see what happens. And it sucks. It really sucks. But I wouldn't be thinking, and I wouldn't imagine you to come in and think, oh, she's too good for us, right? I wouldn't imagine you to come in and think that. But you might come in and have a sense of, oh, that person came in and they're quiet and they didn't really like acknowledge me and like say what's up. So I guess they think they're too good for me. But you're not thinking it. You're just kind of feeling this sense of
distance.
What did you call it?
Distance.
Yes.
But you don't have that instant connect, like, because when you walk into a room, you're supposed to do the black nod, all that stuff. And then when you run across and no one gives you the black nod, I'll go like, hi. And I'm like, they probably think I'm weird, but I need that because we're
when I get the black nod in Portland, it's like some people, like I'll give the black nod, like if they return it, I'm like, cool. Okay. Because I remember my mom used to tell me, like, your dad knows every black person in Portland. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, every black person. And I'm thinking, actually, that doesn't make sense. Like, I knew the black people in my high school because when I graduated in like 98, there were only so many of us. In my middle school, there were like 3 of us. You know what I mean? Like in Portland, there's this really tiny group. You say like, do you remember that black girl who was good at soccer? Yep, we all know who you're talking about because there's so few people in Portland who are in that group. But when you are thinking about it in a larger space, it's like, I don't know. There's this sense of, okay, I want to feel connected to other people, but when I give that black nod, people might think, why is this light-skinned girl nodding at me? And so if I don't get that nod back, I think, oh, I'm not dark enough. But it could just be that in Portland, there really is this sense of mind your own business, keep your head down, don't bother people, and you won't get attacked. And so if people don't return the nod, I understand, because part of it is you just mind your own business. You don't get into trouble. You don't want to call attention to yourself for any reason, because if attention is called to you, then there is a highlight on you, and it's like people are looking for you to mess up. So it's better to just kind of meld into the background, don't do anything big. And so if somebody acknowledges you, you just kind of, there's this shutdown, and people are like, why don't people in Portland say, hey, why don't people in Portland nod their head? And I'm saying that in a really mean way, because I feel mad about it too. I'm like, I want to be connected to folks, right? Like, why aren't people doing this? And it's partially because we're afraid, right? You don't want too much attention on you. This is not a city that was founded on openness and acceptance. It was very much a sundown city. Don't be in the space. We're going to tolerate you because we're not allowed to kill you, but you're not welcome here. And so where there's usually that whole idea of like, hey, camaraderie, let's connect, like we're in this together. I think it was more of this, you mind your own business, don't mess with anything, don't connect with anyone, and you won't have a problem. So I don't know, that nod, I'm like, I want to nod at folks, but then if I don't get a nod back, I'm unsure whether it's because the person didn't see
and
me.
it's funny.
I'm not black enough. What's it about?
Yeah, and so for me, what resonated most strongly for me from what you were saying is just that self-worth piece. So, and like really having a very strong sense of self, because like for instance, you said in that space of like, you know, if you like I walked in a room and I didn't engage you, you begin to immediately go into that insecurity of, well, she doesn't think I'm black enough, which really doesn't have anything to do with anything that I've done or didn't do. It's about your lived experience, and that's something that
Exactly.
you need to work through within yourself. And like for me, because I was thinking, I was like, okay, like, so if I was in a room and a lighter skin, like, what do I go through when I'm in a room and a lighter skinned person comes in the room, especially a lighter skinned black woman comes in the room? What do I start to go through? What happens in me? And I have those thoughts and those feelings of, I say, well, now I don't necessarily go, she thinks she's better than me, so much as I know that the world sort of categorizes this person as better than me, more attractive than me, more intelligent than me, more feminine than me, all of these things. And some of that stuff I even carry within myself, and having to kind of do that extra work of going, like connecting to my own sense of self-worth, my own belief in my own attractiveness, my own belief in my intelligence, my own belief in my worthiness as a darker skinned person. And so it's really not about that other person at all. It's about me, and sort of like really, really,
Exactly.
really having to do this work of like really, really learning my own self-worth, you know, my own identity apart from these other people, because only when I exist in a space of feeling secure in that can I look at that lighter skinned woman that walks the room and just affirm her coming in the room and say, hey girl, what's up, how you doing, rather than going, ooh, I'm feeling kind of crunchy because now I'm feeling less than because she came in the room. Like, you know what I mean? And she literally just came in the fucking room. Like, you know?
This
So
is why we're talking about colorism. Evita, that's exactly it. Because it's the things that we have inside ourselves learned, not what we thought about. Because if we do stop and think about it, we can actually come to a space where we're like, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? But we feel it, and by naming what we're actually feeling instead of putting it out on someone else, instead of being like, oh, she must think I'm this way, but really being like, I feel that this might be what they're thinking, and that makes me feel however, that's when we can see. And once we've kind of sorted out that, then we're not against each other. But that sense of like hierarchy and like, this makes me feel like I'm in this space in this hierarchy. It doesn't feel good to be in a hierarchy. So let me actually pull that out and look at it and call it as false. And then I can let it go and I can actually move forward. But that's so much awareness and work. And I think you have to talk about that it exists, and then you have to talk about how it affects you to be able to start to notice how it affects you. Like even in this conversation, I have a better awareness of how it affects me.
Well, and what you guys were talking about, it brought up, I'm hoping you guys have heard or read of the Willie Lynch letters, you know,
no.
whether it's, oh my gosh. Okay. When I friend you guys on Facebook, you need to come on because I'm going to put it on there. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh. So whether it was actually written in the 1700s or if it was a fictional piece that was written in the 90s, whoever created it really broke down the system of slavery, which is the system of racism. And so he breaks down about how do you divide people to, you know, down to gender so that men and women won't trust each other, dark and light won't. I mean, he just like breaks it down. I'm so putting it on as soon as we're done on here, so you guys have to accept my friendship.
Yeah.
But it's just so amazing that a lot of times I'm not even thinking of my race until I get into a room. And, you know, I do the black nod, and if the black nod is there, I'm like, okay, you know, and I'm in race mode, you know. Or if I don't get the black nod, is it okay? Is it because I'm not dark enough, or is it because they're just not having a good day, or is this really not even an issue? And I just needed that connection, and they don't need that connection, you know. But it's like it always gets back. It gets my mind back to that Willie Lynch letter about how they made sure to go through every way of pitting us against each other, height, virility. I mean, just anything, so that we would not at any point talk to each other and go, you want to get the fuck out of here? You know?
Yeah.
And then also so that, you know, if Mass is giving me extra food, I'm going to go tell on you. because you're my
Right.
divided and you're my unequal, when it's like we all enslaved, we all in this
Yeah, like you was
together.
in the house, but you still a slave. Y'all was still getting raped, and you know what I mean, and having to deal with being dehumanized and all that stuff like that. And so the treatment may have been a little less brutal in some ways, but it was still inhumane regardless. You still weren't free. You still, were still a slave. And you
Yeah.
still had a code of conduct that you had to perform with perfection, because there were dire consequences for you too, no matter if you worked in the house or not, or you worked out in the field. So like, yeah, I mean, not saying the field work wasn't more brutal or wasn't more harsh, or no one's like, discrediting that, but it was still all slavery. Like, you know what I mean? It was still all slavery. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So like,
And white
yeah,
supremacy is just so perfectly planned out, where I would sell out my own brother and sister because I could get honey on my biscuit. We both got biscuits, but I'm going to get a little honey if I can fuck you over. And that's white supremacy.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
And I
here we
feel
are.
like this conversation and us, number one, not recognizing that piece about connecting to your own self-worth, and how this is like, how we have to go deeper in our own work to access and really hold firm to our self-worth, but also not being able to have compassion for each other's experiences because we're too caught up in our own hurts about it, so that we keep kind of being instead of us fighting like white people and white supremacy for color, we're fighting with each other. And so
It's
like
the
nothing's getting done and nothing's getting solved because we can't like see outside of our own pain to sort of have compassion for other people and go, what, we're all getting screwed by white supremacy. Like, light, dark, it don't matter. Like, we're all getting screwed by it. So like, yeah, as a white person, you may have a little bit more privilege, in some ways. Like I said, it's very warped. But like at the end of the day, we're all under the thumb of racial oppression. And, rather than just us kind of acknowledging that and say, okay, enough, like, what I mean, I'm not going to allow this to live within me, because if I allow it to live within me, I keep perpetuating it. We just keep looking over the fence at like how it's affecting someone else, and how, it's not affecting, it's affecting you this way, and, you got it better. So it's like this way that we do the oppression Olympics kind of amongst ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I wanted to talk real quickly. Oh no, go ahead.
I was just thinking about what other situations exist in which everybody working towards one goal and the good would say like, hey, so we're all Black folks, but like you're on, like if we were playing a game and we were all on one team, we wouldn't then single out a couple of people like, you're on the team, but we don't really want your contribution, and you're on the team, but we don't like that you're really on the team, so we're not
Your mom made us
to contribute. On any other space, you look at like, hey, this is the group that we've got. Let's gather everybody's strengths. Let's do what we can. Everybody do what you can to the degree that you can, which may not be the same, but people don't get mad about it, that it might be different in the ways in which, because the goal is to move forward. And I think that part of this, I think, Catherine, I haven't read the document you're talking about. But the idea of looking at, your white supremacy is within the people of color space, there's that in itself just makes it easier for folks to find themselves as a different from each other. And it makes it hard for us all to say, look, this kind of treatment, these kinds of attributes that are given to folks with dark skin, enough. Like, this isn't how it is. We are all individual folks. We all have different experiences. We are all being treated differently as people of color, or having unequitable circumstances because of the color of our skin, whether it's a little bit lighter or a little darker. And yes, those are different, but the problem isn't that they're different within our group. The problem is that it exists at all. That's the problem. So if we're all like, hey, it's not that you get less of a problem and I have more of a problem. The problem is it exists, and that needs to go away. And so we all need to work to make it go away. Then it won't be more or less. It will be gone, and we'll be okay. And that's something that we all have to kind of accept, that it's not who has a little better than me, who has honey on their biscuit. It's why are we fighting for biscuits?
Yes.
Yeah, when
Thank
it's, we
you.
should be fighting the fact that we're slaves. Like, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah,
like, you
we
know,
shouldn't
like,
be fighting for biscuits.
yeah, like
Yeah.
biscuits, you know, honey on the biscuit is the least of our concern. We're still all enslaved. So like, yeah, that's like, that's a real problem. It's like, you know what I mean? So like, you know, we still eating slave biscuits. Mine might have honey on them, but they still slave biscuits. So like,
Yes.
you
No,
know,
I'm gonna be using
like that's
biscuits
really
now. Oh,
right. Now, I wanted to touch on this real quickly because we have about 7 minutes left. Is the hypersexualization of darker skinned bodies as opposed to lighter skinned bodies. So the hot and tight Venus, you know, Sarah Barton, and you know, that mandingo, you know, trope for dark skinned men. And you, like you said, they're seen as more, you know, what's seen as more virile and less virile, and how the closer that you are to whiteness, you're seen as more demure, more chaste, you know, more worthy of like being respected in that way. Like you said, offered marriage, you know, offered like that kind of respectability, and how that shows up for you. Like, you know, for me as a darker skinned woman, you know, I was seen as more DTF, you know what I mean? Like, you know, because I'm darker skinned, or, you know what I mean? Like, you know, people would approach me more in a sexual aspect, you know, than it would be for like having an actual relationship. So it's like, okay, well, if you want to, you know, give me a partnership, it's like, well, I'm not really interested in that. But it was almost this sort of like backdoor kind of thing. But like, I can sneak you in my house late at night, you know, I can call you up for a booty call and that kind of thing. Or like I said, darker skinned men are seen as these mandingos, you know what I mean? They have these, you know, really large members, you know what I mean? If they're identified as men, you know, and so how like darker skinned bodies are much more sexualized, and much more seen as kind of deviant in that regard, than lighter skinned people. I wanted to see if either of you had any experience with that personally, or seen that in your you know, just travels through life in Black bodies.
Well, the thing is, I think just being a woman, we're fetishized in all our different dark and light glories. And so like you're either light exotic or you're dark exotic. I kind of wonder about the person that's in between our complexions. Because I do feel highly sexualized on an erotic or exotic level. And since I was like maybe 12, I felt that. Like there's just something different and weird. But with my darker friends, there has been that. Why is he not taking you out? Like, why are you guys only doing this? You know, and so I'm conscious of it. But as for like actual thoughts, I haven't really generated that much because I just feel like as a woman, we're just already highly sexualized, and it's just viciously done in different ways. So darker women, you have the Hottentot, but then with mixed women, you know, we would be put in whorehouses in the South. And so it's like if you have a vagina, you're going to be victimized, and your shading will show you how you will be victimized. But you're going to be used no matter what.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because that also is that piece of being seen as more attractive. So more people are seeking you out for those kinds of interactions, because you're more you know, you're seen as more attractive. Whereas if you're darker skin, you may not be seen as attractive, but you still have a vulva, you know. So
Yeah, and
you know,
you still want
exactly. So you still have a vulva.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I wonder if it. I mean, obviously there are no men or male identified people on this panel, but I wonder if, you know, they like lighter skin. Well, actually, no, because I feel like for lighter skinned Black men, they get seen as the playboys, you know, so you can't really get like a decent relationship with them, you know, because they're pretty boys and they're players, you know, and they got a whole bunch of different people, and so they don't get the option of being able to go, no, like, you know what I mean, I really want to settle down with the person, or, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm not, you know, unfaithful, I'm not a cheater, you know, all of these things. And then I think, you know, darker skinned men are just kind of seen as these sort of beasts of burden in the bed. Like they're not even allowed really like a, you know, because they're just kind of seen as just these like kind of these brute force sort of beasts in bed, as opposed to like, you know, having actual humanity, like wanting to connect intimately,
Right.
not really like allowed that space.
And I
Yeah,
think
they become trophies.
yeah, but I do think the darker women are more sexualized. And I say this because if you look at the trends of what makes what our current society is valuing as sexy, a lot of the features have to do with Black women, right? But not in Black bodies. So, so the features of a Black woman. Let me puff up my lips. Why? That's because you're sexier, right? Who has larger lips in our general, who has that general physique? Black women. A larger butt, right? Who has a larger butt? Black women generally, like if you look at the physique, have a larger butt than some of the European bodies, right? So that's like, well, let me get my body parts to match up with what matches with the Black body, but I don't want the Black skin, right? I'm going to keep, it's not like they have necessarily a choice, but those features of Black women are considered sexy, right? Some of the types of dancing that African dancing does, that's so sexy, shake your body, right? But that is about, that's sexy. It's not. And to contrast to that, it doesn't mean that light-skinned Black people are not considered attractive, or your term of they're exotic. But I think that when people are looking in that way, it might be a little bit less of a that body so sexy, let's right, versus you're so different, let me check you out, right? Like more of a I don't know, like just something that's kind of different, right? Fetish versus just you're there for sex, but there's nothing about a relationship with a Black woman. Like I don't see a lot of those kinds of stories. There's like, and it's in so many things. Like look at her, look at, she's got the body parts even in songs, but there's not a whole lot of focusing on the person as a whole. Same thing you were mentioning with Black men, as like a whole person who has experiences and who has, emotional needs, rather just like, hey, get in there. I can see that as being a very different experience. Hey, Alexandra.
Hi, I wanted to add something to this conversation because I'll tell you, the first time I really started paying attention to colorism, I didn't grow up in this country, so I also just didn't even understand like Black or African American. I grew up in an international community with a wide range of color as well as culture and everything. And so when I came to the United States when I was 15, I was like, what is going on here? And I did not even really understand or hear about colorism until probably a few years ago. It was not on my radar. And then I was like, oh, I know what this is. I just didn't know there was like a coined word for it or whatever. And I will tell you, one of my friends through Africa Week 2020, a good friend of mine, Beto Torrens, he was telling me a story about some journey of something that happened that got him to a point. And in part of the story, this was from like his youth. There was a woman in the story, and he was like, I thought she was so beautiful. And he's explaining this woman, and he's like, and he has an accent. He's from Puerto Rico. He's like, and her white nose. And I thought for a minute, I was like, did he say white nose? And I was like, no, I know Beto. Why would he say her white nose? And then I realized that for the first time at 37 years old, this is like a conversation from a month ago. For the first time in my life, I heard somebody describe a woman that he thought was beautiful and attracted to her wide African nose.
Oh.
He was saying her wide nose. And I was like, I've never heard that before. It was shocking to me that feature, I'd never heard of it being something that, you never hear. Do you ever hear somebody say their wide nose or big nostrils in a sonnet?
Not in a positive way.
No, you know what? That's really funny. So my grandmother, she was beautiful, beautiful black skin woman, very dark skin, but she had a very very like thin nose. And so what she told me was that her mother, when she was a baby, would pinch her nose because all of my dad's family, my great grandmother, and all of her brothers and sisters had this very wide black nose. And she didn't want her to get that nose. So as a baby, she would pinch her nose and pinch her nose and pinch her nose because she was trying to get her to have a thinner nose. So I've never heard wide nose as being seen as something that was attractive. It was always seen as something that you kind of didn't like. Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to add that. I also wanted to tell you that I want to respect your time. You are at 2 hours. However, you can go over as far as you want to. I just know that you all are busy. And so I just want to let you know, we had a 4-hour panel, a 4.5-hour panel that went on for that long 2 days ago. So really on our end, you can go on as long as you want, but I also wanted to just let you know, just in case, you know.
I actually do have to leave, so I am wrap this up. But thank you all for coming and for sharing your experiences,
awesome.
for bringing light to this. This was amazing. So happy to have met you all and to have had this conversation, and also to have had this conversation in such a like loving way, as opposed to like really because when I thought about doing this panel, like I was like, oh, I don't know about this. I was like, I've never talked to these people, and after the other conversations I'd had with people about colorism, like I was like, this could get spicy, like, you know what I mean? I was a little like but this conversation went really well. I really appreciated everyone's input, and so I really want to thank you all for showing up and showing out as you all did. It was great.
Absolutely, we all friends now.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think Tiana too, even though she had technical difficulties, and I wish that I could have heard more of her story. I really did appreciate the things that she was able to contribute to.
Yeah. I want to mention her contribution also, and just say thank you to her. I don't know if she's watching or not, but for coming and contributing for when she did, I appreciated her input. And so you all have a wonderful, wonderful evening. This was great, and I definitely will be talking soon because, like you said, we sisters now, actually.
Yes, we are. All right, ladies.
Bye.
Good meeting you and talking. Bye.
Bye.